In the dawn of humanity, when the world was a garden of innocence, the gods of Olympus conceived a masterpiece of deception. Her name was Pandora, the all-gifted. Fashioned from earth and water, she was bestowed with beauty, cunning, and a charm that could rival the divine. She was sent to the mortal realm not as a blessing, but as a punishment disguised in perfection. With her, she carried a vessel, a sealed pithos from Zeus himself, with a single, solemn warning. It was never to be opened. But what is a warning against the fire of curiosity, a gift bestowed upon her by the very gods who sought to test mankind? This is the story of the first woman, the forbidden container, and the moment that forever changed the human experience. It is the story of how all the world's sorrows were unleashed, and why, in the face of it all, we were left with one final, flickering flame: hope. The story of Pandora does not begin with a woman. It begins with fire, and with an act of cosmic defiance. On the slopes of Mount Olympus, Zeus, king of the gods, reigned with absolute authority. His rule was law, his word, destiny. But one being, the Titan Prometheus, dared to challenge that order. He saw the fledgling race of mortals below, shivering in the cold, living in a primitive state, and he was moved by compassion. In a moment of supreme rebellion, he stole a glowing ember from the hearth of the gods and delivered the gift of fire to humanity. This single act transformed the mortal world. It brought warmth, light, and the dawn of civilization. But for Zeus, it was an unforgivable transgression. The gift was not the issue. The disobedience was. The king of the gods was consumed by a cold, calculating rage. His vengeance would be twofold. For Prometheus, the punishment was direct and brutal, a sentence of endless torment. But for the mortals who had benefited from this stolen gift, Zeus envisioned a more subtle, more insidious form of retribution. He would not destroy them with lightning or floods. Instead, he would give them a gift of his own, a beautiful evil to live among them, a permanent affliction cloaked in irresistible beauty. He summoned the divine craftsman, Hephaestus, the god of the forge. His command was simple and chilling. From earth and water, he was to fashion a creature in the image of the immortal goddesses, a maiden, perfect in form. This was not an act of creation born from love or inspiration. It was an act of celestial engineering, the forging of a weapon. Hephaestus labored, shaping the clay with divine skill. The result was a masterpiece, a form so lifelike, so exquisite, it could rival the goddesses themselves. But as she stood completed in the forge, she was merely a vessel, a beautiful shell devoid of life or spirit. She was the first step in a divine conspiracy, a silent, inanimate testament to a god's fury. The instrument of humanity's downfall was ready. Now, it only needed to be armed. The lifeless form was presented to the pantheon on Olympus. The gods gathered, not to welcome a new immortal, but to complete their instrument of revenge. This creation would be their collective masterpiece of deception. Zeus decreed that each god would bestow upon her a gift, and it was from this endowment that she would receive her name, Pandora, the all-gifted. The process began. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and craft, stepped forward. She dressed Pandora in shimmering silver robes and taught her the intricate arts of the loom, granting her skill and grace. Pandora's hands, once inert clay, now moved with purpose and artistry. Next came Aphrodite, the goddess of love. She bestowed upon the maiden the potent gift of irresistible charm and poured desire into her being, ensuring no mortal man could look upon her without being captivated. Her beauty was no longer just form. It was an active, alluring force. The graces and persuasion adorned her with golden necklaces and fine jewelry, making her a vision of divine elegance. But it was the gift from Hermes, the messenger god and divine trickster, that sealed her purpose. He, at the command of Zeus, instilled in her a deceitful heart and a lying tongue. This was the poison hidden within the honey. While her outward appearance was one of innocence and perfection, her inner nature was now programmed for cunning and guile. She possessed the skills of a homemaker, the allure of a goddess, and the mind of a conspirator. This duality was the very essence of the trap. She was made to be loved, to be welcomed, to be trusted, yet her entire existence was a carefully constructed falsehood. She was a paradox, a beautiful thing designed to bring about misery. When the gods were finished, Pandora stood before them, a living, breathing work of art. She was the perfect bride, the perfect companion, and the perfect weapon. Zeus looked upon his creation with satisfaction. His plan was proceeding flawlessly. The beautiful evil was now complete, animated by divine power and armed with irresistible gifts. All that remained was to deliver her to the unsuspecting world below. To understand the success of Zeus's plan, one must understand the intended recipient. The target was not Prometheus, the forethinker, whose wisdom and caution had led him to defy the gods for humanity's sake. Even from his place of torment, Prometheus understood Zeus's vengeful nature. He sent a desperate warning to his brother, Epimetheus: never, under any circumstances, accept a gift from the king of the gods. But Epimetheus was his brother's opposite. His name meant after-thinker. He was impulsive, naive, and fundamentally trusting, often realizing the consequences of his actions only after they were done. It was this fatal flaw that Zeus intended to exploit. Hermes, the swift messenger, was tasked with escorting Pandora from the heights of Olympus down to the mortal plane. Her arrival was an unprecedented event. Until that moment, the world of men had been a simple, idyllic place, a golden age free from toil and hardship. Pandora's appearance, a vision of divine beauty and grace, left all who saw her speechless. Epimetheus was utterly spellbound. The warnings of his far-seeing brother vanished from his mind, eclipsed by the overwhelming charm Aphrodite had bestowed upon Pandora. He saw not a potential threat, but a perfect, miraculous gift. He saw a companion, a bride, a blessing from the very gods his brother had warned him against. The ancient poet Hesiod tells us he took the maiden, and when the evil was already his, he understood. His name was his destiny. He thought only of the immediate joy she brought, not the potential price. He welcomed her into his home, into his life, and in doing so, he accepted the gift he was explicitly forbidden to take. To the world, their union was a joyous occasion. Humanity had received a divine companion, a being of unparalleled beauty to live among them. But as Epimetheus celebrated his new bride, he was blind to the fact that he had just willingly opened the door to humanity's undoing. The trap, so carefully laid by Zeus, had been sprung not by force, but by a simple, tragic act of acceptance. With the bride came the dowry. In ancient traditions, a dowry was a gift of property or money from the bride's family to the groom. But Pandora, a creation of the gods, came with a dowry of a very different kind. It was not land or livestock, gold or jewels. It was a container. The ancient Greek texts describe it as a pythos, a large earthenware jar, though centuries of retelling have famously transformed it into a box. Whatever its form, its appearance was likely deceptive. It may have been beautifully ornate, a work of divine art in itself, hinting at precious contents within. Or perhaps it was stark and plain, its mystery making it all the more intriguing. It was delivered to Pandora with a single, solemn instruction, a divine command directly from Zeus. It was never to be opened. This prohibition is the psychological core of the myth. Why include the jar at all? If the goal was simply to punish humanity, why not release its contents on Olympus? The inclusion of the sealed container was the final, most ingenious element of the trap. It was not aimed at Prometheus, the afterthinker, but at Pandora herself. The gods had created her, gifted her, and within her, Hermes had placed a deceitful heart. It is possible they also instilled in her the uniquely human trait of curiosity. The jar sat in their home, a silent, constant presence. It was a physical manifestation of a divine secret. Day after day, it drew Pandora's attention. What wonders, or what horrors, could it possibly hold? The command not to open it only amplified its allure. The temptation would have been a slow burn, an idea that took root and grew into an obsession. The lid, the latch, the seal, they were a puzzle begging to be solved. She was given a secret and simultaneously forbidden from knowing it. The gods had not just sent a beautiful woman, they had sent a loaded question, a ticking clock, and placed the detonator in her hands. The tension was unbearable, a silent battle waged in the mind of the first woman. The chapter ends with this image of profound internal conflict, her gaze locked on the forbidden object, her hand trembling as it moves inexorably closer. The moment arrives. Curiosity, whether a gift from the gods or a flaw of her own nature, triumphs over obedience. With trembling hands, Pandora lifts the lid of the great jar. In that single, fateful instant, the world is forever changed. There is no cascade of gold or jewels. Instead, what emerges is an intangible, invisible swarm. Out from the jar fly all the evils and sorrows that Zeus had captured and contained. Sickness, which had never before touched a mortal body. Hard labor, which turned the easy abundance of the earth into a daily struggle. Strife, which set friends and neighbors against one another. Countless other miseries, great and small, were unleashed upon the world, a relentless plague upon the human condition. The golden age of humanity was over, shattered by the opening of a single vessel. The idyllic life, free from pain and worry, became a distant memory, a lost paradise. This was the true nature of Zeus's revenge, not a swift, clean annihilation, but a sentence of perpetual suffering, a curse woven into the very fabric of mortal existence. Pandora, seeing the terrible consequence of her action, reacts in panic. She slams the heavy lid back onto the jar, sealing it shut. But it is far too late. The evils are already loose, spreading across the earth like a phantom host. All have escaped. All, that is, except for one. Left behind, fluttering weakly at the bottom of the jar, is a single, final entity. The ancient Greeks called it Olympus. In English, we call it hope. Here, the myth presents its most profound and enduring question. Why was hope in the jar with all the evils? Was it merely the last and most subtle of the curses, a cruel trick to keep humanity striving, to make them endure their newfound suffering with the false promise of a better tomorrow? Or was it an unintentional mercy, a final, tiny sliver of light left to mortals in their new, troubled world? The gods do not provide an answer. The myth ends with this powerful ambiguity. Humanity now possesses all the evils of the world, but they also possess hope. Whether it is a comfort or a curse, it is the one thing that remains, locked away until it is needed most. Pandora was a marvel, a creation of breathtaking artistry. Hephaestus, the master craftsman of Olympus, had formed her from earth and water, giving her a shape that mirrored the immortals. Athena had dressed her in shimmering silver robes and taught her the fine arts of the loom. Aphrodite had bestowed upon her a grace that could charm any heart, mortal or divine. But it was Hermes, the clever messenger, who gave her the final, fateful gifts: a cunning mind, a persuasive voice, and a deep, insatiable curiosity. This last quality was a seed planted in the very core of her being, destined to grow. When she was presented to Prometheus, the brother of Prometheus, he was captivated. He had been warned by his wiser brother never to accept any gift from Zeus, but the sight of Pandora erased all caution from his mind. He welcomed her into his home, into the world of humankind, which was then a golden realm of peace. In this perfect world, there was one object that did not belong. It was a jar, or in later tellings, a box, ornate and heavy, sealed with intricate clasps. It was a wedding gift from Zeus himself, delivered with a single, solemn instruction: it must never be opened. For a time, Pandora was content. The world was new and filled with wonders. She learned the rhythms of the earth, the joy of a sun-drenched afternoon, and the simple companionship of Prometheus. Yet, the box was always there. It sat in a corner of their dwelling, a silent testament to a divine secret. It seemed to draw the light in the room, its polished surface reflecting her own conflicted face. The warning from the gods echoed in her mind, a low rumble of thunder on a clear day. But another sound, a softer one, began to grow louder. It was a whisper, born of the gift from Hermes. What could be inside? Why would the gods send something so beautiful only to forbid its discovery? Surely, a gift from the king of Olympus could not contain anything truly terrible. The whispers turned into questions, the questions into a constant, nagging ache. The box was no longer just an object, it was a challenge, a puzzle that her very nature compelled her to solve. Every glance in its direction fueled the fire of her curiosity, a fire that was beginning to burn brighter than any divine warning. The world Pandora entered was an artist's dream, a paradise untouched by the concepts of labor or pain. In this golden age, humanity lived in effortless harmony with nature. The earth offered up its fruits freely, without the need for plow or sickle. Rivers ran with milk and nectar, and honey dripped from the trees. There was no illness to weaken the body, no old age to diminish its strength. People lived long, peaceful lives, and their passing was as gentle as falling into a deep sleep. For Prometheus and Pandora, each day was a tapestry of simple joys. They walked through meadows bursting with flowers that never faded, their time measured not by tasks to be done, but by the rising and setting of a benevolent sun. There were no locks on doors, because there was no concept of theft. There were no harsh words, because envy and anger had not yet found a voice. It was a state of pure, untroubled existence, a perfect life gifted by the gods. Yet, even in this flawless world, the box remained. It was a single, discordant note in a perfect symphony. Its presence was a constant, low hum beneath the surface of their idyllic life. Pandora would try to ignore it, busying herself with weaving or walking with Prometheus along the sparkling streams. But her eyes would always find their way back to it. The box did not belong in this world of openness and light. It was a secret, a shadow, a question mark in a world of answers. Her curiosity, once a gentle whisper, now began to reason with her. Perhaps the warning was a test of her courage, not her obedience. What if the box contained not a punishment, but a reward? Perhaps it held even greater wonders, blessings that the gods were saving for those bold enough to claim them. The logic seemed sound in the quiet moments when she was alone. The paradise around her was beautiful, but it was also unchanging. It was a perfection that left no room for discovery, no thrill of the unknown. The box offered that. It promised something more, something different. The undisturbed paradise was beginning to feel like a beautiful cage, and the box, she started to believe, might just hold the key. The perfect world was holding its breath, balanced on the edge of a choice that had not yet been made, but was feeling more inevitable with every passing day. The struggle was no longer a fleeting thought. It was the entirety of Pandora's world. The idyllic landscape around her became a blur, the sweet songs of birds a distant noise. Her focus had narrowed to a single point, the sealed container in her home. The divine warning was a heavy cloak, a constant reminder of cosmic law and the power of Zeus. To disobey was to challenge the very order of the universe. She imagined the stern faces of the Olympians, their disappointment, their potential wrath. She remembered the solemn tone in which the prohibition was delivered, a tone that spoke of grave and irreversible consequences. This was the voice of fear, of caution, of obedience. But the voice of curiosity, the gift of Hermes, was far more seductive. It did not threaten, it coaxed. It painted pictures not of ruin, but of revelation. What knowledge might it hold? What secrets of the gods could be revealed? The nature of humanity, a blend of divine spark and mortal clay, is to question, to explore, to push against boundaries. Pandora was the mother of that nature. She began to craft justifications, arguments that felt like wisdom. To live in ignorance, she reasoned, was not a true existence. To accept a gift but refuse to understand it was an act of ingratitude, not piety. The gods had given her a mind capable of wonder. Was it not her duty to use it? The box was a test, she became convinced, but not in the way Prometheus believed. It was a test of her spirit. Would she remain a passive resident of a perfect, static world, or would she become an active participant in her own destiny, embracing the unknown? The weight of this single choice pressed down on her. It was a decision that felt intensely personal, yet she sensed it was not hers alone. It was a choice for all of humanity, a turning point that would define their future. The fate of generations seemed to rest upon the movement of her hands. One afternoon, as the golden light streamed into their home, the inner conflict reached its breaking point. The fear of punishment and the desire for knowledge could no longer coexist. One had to yield. She approached the box, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She ran her fingers over the smooth wood, tracing the intricate carvings. The air grew still. The world seemed to pause, waiting. In that moment, the whispers won. The need to know eclipsed the fear of the unknown. Her decision was made. With a final, trembling breath, Pandora's fingers closed around the latch. The metal was cool to the touch, a stark contrast to the heat of her own anticipation. There was a faint click, a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the silent room, a sound that echoed like the cracking of a foundation. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Pandora stared, half expecting a flash of divine light or a clap of thunder. There was only silence. Then, slowly, the heavy lid began to rise, lifted not by her hand, but by an unseen pressure from within. A strange, dry wind rushed out, not a refreshing breeze, but a chilling current that seemed to drain the warmth from the air. It carried no scent of flowers or earth, but an arid, dusty quality, the smell of ages locked away. It was not a sudden explosion, but a creeping, insidious release. From the opening emerged not monsters or demons of grotesque form, but intangible things, shadowy and formless. They were whispers that took flight, invisible spirits that swirled through the room and out into the perfect world. They were concepts given substance, the very things humanity had never known. First came sickness, a cold presence that settled deep in the bones. Then came toil, a heavy weight that bowed the shoulders. Jealousy, a bitter taste in the mouth, and spite, a sharp sting behind the eyes, followed close behind. An entire host of miseries, an army of unseen afflictions, poured out in a relentless, silent torrent. Pandora stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. This was not the knowledge or wonder she had imagined. This was a violation. She could feel the change immediately. The light filtering through the doorway seemed dimmer, the colors of the world outside less vibrant. A sudden weariness filled her limbs, a fatigue she had never before experienced. The air, once filled with the promise of endless, easy days, now felt heavy with a new and terrible potential. She slammed the lid shut, the heavy wood meeting the base with a final, hollow thud. But it was too late. The room was empty, the box was quiet, but the world outside was no longer the same. The seal was broken, and with it, the unbroken peace of the Golden Age. Paradise was lost, not in a great battle, but in the quiet click of a single unlocked box. The change was not instantaneous, but it was relentless. The afflictions released from the box spread like pollen on the wind, unseen but potent, settling over the world and taking root in the hearts of humankind. The first sign was confusion. People who had only known contentment now felt a prickle of irritation at a neighbor. A farmer, for the first time, looked at his harvest and felt it was not enough, casting an envious glance at the field next to his. The effortless bounty of the earth began to recede. Fruits that once fell from the branch now had to be coaxed with sweat and effort. The ground grew hard and resistant to the plow. This was toil, sinking its teeth into the land. Then came physical ailments. A child developed a fever, a sensation utterly unknown and terrifying. An elder felt a new ache in his joints that did not pass with the morning sun. The ageless strength of humanity began to fail, replaced by fragility and the slow, creeping advance of time. Pandora and Prometheus watched in horror as their world unraveled. The harmony they had taken for granted was replaced by discord. Laughter, once the common language, became interspersed with the unfamiliar sounds of argument and complaint. The paradise had been tainted, its perfection revealed as a fragile, temporary state. Pandora was consumed by a profound sense of responsibility. Every new hardship she witnessed was a testament to her single, fateful act of curiosity. She would sit for hours, staring at the box, now just an inert wooden container, its great secret revealed and its purpose fulfilled. It was an emblem of her failure. One evening, as she sat in the growing twilight, a faint noise reached her ears. It was not the sinister whisper of the escaping troubles, but something else entirely. It was a tiny, fluttering sound, delicate and persistent, coming from inside the closed box. Hesitantly, she approached it, her ear close to the wood. The sound was faint, but clear. Something had been left behind. Something had been too slow, too gentle to join the frantic, chaotic exodus of the others. A different kind of spirit remained trapped within. The swarm of sorrows had passed, but one last thing lay waiting in the container, its nature a complete mystery. Pandora was faced with another choice: to leave the box sealed forever, or to open it one last time. Before the woman, before the jar, there was an age of perfection. The ancient poets, Hesiod foremost among them, called it the Golden Age. It was a time when humanity lived in a state of grace, almost indistinguishable from the gods themselves. The earth, a generous mother, offered up its bounty without coaxing. There was no need for the plow or the sickle. Fruits and grains grew in abundance, ready for the taking. The seasons were a constant, gentle spring, and the air was always mild. In this idyllic world, men lived without toil, without hardship, and without the slow decay of age. They spent their days in leisure, their bodies never weakening, their minds untroubled by the anxieties that would later define the human condition. When their long lives came to a close, they simply fell into a peaceful sleep. This was the world that existed under the reign of the Titan Cronus, a world of harmony between mortals, nature, and the divine. But this era was not to last. After the great war between the Titans and the Olympians, Zeus ascended to the throne of the cosmos. His rule brought order, but it also brought a new dynamic between gods and men. The story of Prometheus, the firebringer who championed humanity, had created a deep rift. Zeus, feeling his authority challenged, sought a way to balance the scales, to remind humanity of its subordinate place. His response was not a thunderbolt or a flood, but something far more subtle and enduring. He commanded the craftsman god, Hephaestus, to mold a new creation from earth and water. She was given life, and every god and goddess of Olympus bestowed upon her a unique gift: beauty from Aphrodite, persuasive speech from Hermes, skill in weaving from Athena. They named her Pandora, meaning all-gifted. She was a masterpiece of divine artifice, sent to the mortal world as a beautiful evil. She arrived not as a conqueror, but as a bride for Prometheus, the unwary brother of Prometheus. With her, she brought a single, sealed vessel, a wedding gift from Zeus himself, accompanied by a solemn warning: it must never be opened. In the perfect world of the Golden Age, this sealed jar stood as a singular mystery, a silent testament to a power that mortals were not meant to understand. Its presence was a seed of discord, a challenge to the unbroken peace, waiting for the one emotion that had not yet been known to humankind: curiosity. The warning from Zeus echoed in Pandora's mind, a divine command that carried the weight of Olympus. But curiosity, the gift of the gods, proved to be a powerful and relentless force. Day after day, the jar sat in her home, a silent, inscrutable object. What wonders could it contain? What treasures had the king of the gods sealed within? The possibilities were endless, a constant whisper in her thoughts. Her husband, Prometheus, whose name means afterthought, had accepted the gift without suspicion, forgetting his brother Prometheus's stern warning to accept nothing from Zeus. For him, Pandora was the gift, a perfect companion in a perfect world. But for Pandora, the jar was a lock without a key, a riddle demanding to be solved. The internal struggle was immense. On one side was obedience and the preservation of the perfect harmony she had entered. On the other was an insatiable desire to know, to see, to understand. This was not an act born of malice, but of a quintessentially human impulse. Finally, the temptation became unbearable. In a moment that would forever alter the course of history, she approached the vessel. Her hands trembled as she worked at the heavy lid. With one decisive movement, she lifted it. What emerged was not a treasure of gold or jewels. It was an invisible, intangible swarm. Hesiod describes them as countless plagues. They were not monsters with claws and fangs, but the very concepts of suffering that had been alien to the world. Out flew sickness, with its fevers and chills. Out flew exhausting toil, which would turn the generous earth into a demanding master. Out flew old age, the slow thief of vitality. With them came strife, jealousy, misery, and all the other sorrows that plague the human heart. They spread across the land silently and swiftly, an unseen pestilence. The sky, once perpetually clear, seemed to dim. The flowers lost some of their vibrancy. A sudden chill entered the air. For the first time, a man felt a sharp pain in his joints. A woman felt the sting of a cruel word. In a panic, realizing the catastrophic nature of her actions, Pandora slammed the lid shut. But it was too late. The world was already filled with the spirits of affliction. The Golden Age had ended in an instant, not with a bang, but with the quiet opening of a lid. The consequences of Pandora's action were not fleeting. They were fundamental, reshaping the very fabric of existence. The world that humanity woke up to the next day was not the one they had known. The earth, once a willing provider, now became stubborn and resistant. To eat, men had to learn the meaning of labor. They forged the first plows, breaking the soil that now demanded sweat and effort in exchange for its harvest. This was the birth of toil, an endless cycle of work that would define human life from then on. The eternal spring of the Golden Age was shattered. Harsh winters descended, forcing people to build shelters for the first time, to huddle together for warmth against the biting winds. The gentle sun of summer became scorching, demanding respect and caution. The seasons were born, and with them, a new awareness of time, of cycles, and of decay. Sickness, once an unknown concept, became an intimate companion. Fevers, aches, and ailments afflicted bodies that had never known weakness. The concept of mortality, once a peaceful transition into sleep, became a source of apprehension. Men and women now watched their parents grow frail, their own bodies betraying them with the slow march of old age. This physical decline was mirrored by a social one. With the need for resources came the idea of ownership. With ownership came envy, and from envy grew strife. The simple harmony of the Golden Age gave way to disputes over land, possessions, and status. Communities that had lived in perfect accord now knew conflict, suspicion, and betrayal. Hesiod charts this decline through the subsequent ages of humanity. The Silver Age saw mortals who were less noble, who neglected the gods. The Bronze Age was a time of warriors, strong and relentless, their lives consumed by conflict. Finally came the Iron Age, the poet's own time, a period of constant labor, misery, and a world where respect and justice had faded. Zeus's plan had been devastatingly effective. Humanity, once living as equals to the gods, was now humbled. They were bound to the earth, subject to time, and forced to contend with a world filled with hardship. The gift of Pandora had successfully created a permanent distance between mortals and the divine, ensuring humanity would never again forget its place. In the new and challenging world they had helped create, Pandora and Prometheus lived with the weight of their actions. The sounds of the world had changed. The easy laughter of the Golden Age had been replaced by the cries of exertion, the groans of the unwell, and the sharp tones of argument. Every cough, every dispute, every drop of sweat was a reminder of the moment the lid was lifted. Pandora, in particular, was consumed by a profound sense of responsibility. She, the all-gifted, had been the vessel for this great undoing. The beautiful evil had fulfilled her purpose, and the knowledge was a heavy burden. Prometheus, the after-thinker, now understood the wisdom of his brother's warning all too clearly. He saw the consequences in the lines of fatigue on his wife's face and in the struggles of their neighbors. Their home, once a place of simple contentment, now held a monument to their mistake, the sealed jar. It sat where it had always been, but its presence was no longer just a mystery. It was a source of apprehension. They avoided looking at it, as if it might unleash further troubles just by being acknowledged. Then, one day, a new sound began. It was different from the harsh noises of the transformed world. It was a faint, persistent tapping from inside the jar. At other times, it sounded like a soft, muffled voice, a plea from within the clay. Pandora and Prometheus were frozen with uncertainty. What other horror could possibly remain? Had one of the plagues been trapped inside, waiting for a second chance to escape? The thought was terrifying. To open the jar again seemed like an act of madness, a repetition of the original folly. Prometheus, having learned the price of haste, likely counseled her to leave it sealed forever, to ignore the sound, to bury the jar, to pretend it did not exist. But the sound was persistent. It was not aggressive or demanding like the evils that had flown out. It was delicate, almost fragile. It seemed to call to Pandora, not with the seductive whisper of curiosity, but with a different, more complex appeal. Was this another test from Zeus, or was it something else entirely? The world was already saturated with misery. Could anything make it worse? As the faint voice continued its appeal from within the vessel, Pandora found herself in the grip of a new dilemma. Her first act had been driven by impulse. This second choice would have to be one of conscious will, made with the full knowledge of the potential for disaster. Her hand hovered over the lid, trembling not with excitement, but with the heavy burden of consequence. Pandora made her choice. It was not a surrender to curiosity, but an act of courage, perhaps even an attempt at atonement. She could not put the evils back in the jar, but she could not bear the thought of leaving one final mystery sealed away while the world suffered. With a steady hand and a resolute heart, she lifted the lid for a second time. There was no chaotic swarm, no rush of shadowy forms. Instead, a single delicate entity fluttered out. It was a luminous, winged spirit, shimmering with a gentle light. It did not fly far and wide to spread its influence, but rather lingered, its presence a soothing balm in the troubled air. This was Olympus, the last spirit remaining in the great jar. In English, we know her as Hope. Hope's release fundamentally changed the interpretation of Pandora's story. It was not a cure for the world's new afflictions. Sickness still ravaged bodies, toil still broke backs, and strife still divided nations. Hope did not erase the suffering. It made the suffering bearable. It was the force that allowed a farmer to plant seeds in the spring after a harsh winter, believing in a future harvest. It was the strength that helped the unwell endure their ailment, trusting in the possibility of recovery. It was the vision that inspired people to build communities and laws, striving for a better world despite the prevalence of conflict. The question that has echoed through the centuries is whether Olympus's presence in the jar was by accident or by design. Was Zeus, in his intricate plan, so cruel as to unleash misery upon humanity without a single tool to withstand it? Or was hope a deliberate, final touch? Perhaps he understood that for humanity to endure, to continue to worship the gods, and to strive for greatness, they needed a reason to look forward. Hope was the counterbalance, the element that prevented total despair. By trapping all the evils in a jar, Zeus contained them. By having Pandora release them, he scattered them. But hope, by being the last one out, released by a conscious and deliberate act, became a permanent fixture of the human condition. Pandora, the woman whose name was once synonymous with disaster, is thus transformed. She is the bringer of sorrow, yes, but she is also the one who gave humanity its most essential tool for survival. Her legacy is a duality that defines our own existence, a world filled with immense challenges, yet one that is always illuminated by the persistent, radiant light of hope. The image is iconic, etched into the collective consciousness of Western culture. A woman, driven by an irresistible curiosity, opens a forbidden box, unleashing chaos upon the world. This is the Pandora we think we know. Yet, this entire image is built upon a fundamental misunderstanding, a linguistic slip that occurred centuries after the myth was first written down. The original story, as told by the ancient Greek poet Hesiod in his epic Works and Days, never mentions a box. The object at the heart of the tale was something far more mundane and far more revealing: a pithos. A pithos was a large earthenware storage jar, a common sight in any ancient Greek household. These massive containers were used to store essentials like olive oil, wine, grain, and water. They were part of the domestic landscape, symbols of sustenance and daily life, not mystical artifacts. This detail is crucial. The evils of the world, according to Hesiod, were not sealed away in a special, ornate container, but were stored in an object associated with the very fabric of human existence. The transformation from pithos to box began in the 16th century with the great humanist scholar Erasmus of Rotterdam. While translating Hesiod's Greek text into Latin, he encountered the word pithos. Instead of finding a direct equivalent, or perhaps to make the story more relatable to his audience, he chose the Latin word pyxis. A pyxis was a small, often decorated box used for holding cosmetics, medicines, or jewelry. It was an object of personal value, of secrets. This choice, seemingly minor, irrevocably altered the myth's symbolism. The pythos represented troubles integrated into the foundation of human life, an inheritance of hardship. The pyxis, the box, reframed the story into one of personal transgression. It made Pandora's action feel more deliberate, more focused. It was no longer about disturbing the contents of the household larder, but about prying open a secret container. This shift subtly directs more personal blame onto Pandora. Her curiosity is no longer a general impulse, but a specific desire to uncover a hidden secret. The box is alluring, mysterious, and tempting in a way a large, heavy storage jar is not. It turns a foundational myth about the nature of human suffering into a cautionary tale about feminine curiosity. A single word, changed in translation, recast the narrative, creating the powerful but inaccurate image that has dominated art and literature for the last 500 years. The story was no longer about the gods embedding sorrow into our world. It became the story of a woman who chose to open the lid. Myths are not static relics of the past. They are living narratives, mirrors that reflect the values, fears, and philosophies of the societies that retell them. Few myths have been held up to the light of changing times as often as that of Pandora. Each era has looked into her story and found a different meaning, a reflection of its own anxieties and beliefs. For Hesiod and his ancient Greek audience, the tale served a clear purpose. It was a theodicy, an attempt to explain the existence of suffering in a world supposedly governed by powerful gods. It justified the harsh realities of agrarian life, the backbreaking labor, the constant threat of disease, and the unpredictability of nature. Pandora, the Kalan Kakon, or beautiful evil, was the divine explanation for why life was so difficult. She also served to legitimize the patriarchal structure of Greek society, framing woman as a necessary but inherently troublesome addition to the world of men. With the rise of Christianity, Pandora found a new counterpart in Eve. Early church fathers like Tertullian drew direct parallels between the two. Both were the first women. Both were held responsible for a foundational transgression that unleashed suffering and mortality upon humanity. Pandora's jar and Eve's forbidden fruit became synonymous with a primal act of disobedience. This interpretation solidified the view of woman as the source of temptation and original sin, a theme that would dominate Western thought for centuries. The Renaissance and the subsequent Age of Enlightenment began to shift the focus. As humanism placed mankind at the center of the universe, Pandora was re-examined. Her curiosity was no longer seen as purely a vice, but as an embodiment of the human thirst for knowledge, a dangerous but essential driver of progress and discovery. The box became a metaphor for forbidden knowledge, which, once uncovered, could never be returned to ignorance. More recently, modern interpretations, particularly from a feminist perspective, have sought to dismantle the traditional narrative entirely. These readings question Pandora's culpability. Was she a malicious agent or a tragic pawn in a game played by angry, male gods? Some scholars argue the myth is a perversion of an older story, one where Pandora was a life-giving earth goddess, and her jar originally contained blessings, not curses. In this view, the myth as we know it is propaganda, created by a rising patriarchal religion to demonize the old goddesses. From a divine punishment to a symbol of humanism to a feminist icon, Pandora has been constantly reinvented. Her story remains a powerful testament to our unending quest to understand our own nature and the origins of our sorrows. In any great tragedy, it is human nature to seek a cause, to find a single point of failure, a person to hold responsible. For the sorrows of the entire world, Western tradition has long pointed its finger at one figure, Pandora. She is perhaps the ultimate scapegoat, a character engineered from her very inception to take the fall for the cruelty of a god. To understand her role, we must look past her actions and examine the motives of her creator, Zeus. Pandora was not born of love or chance. She was forged in the fires of vengeance. Her existence was a direct and calculated response to the titan Prometheus, who had defied Zeus by stealing fire and giving it to mortals. Enraged, the king of the gods devised a punishment not just for Prometheus, but for all of humanity who had benefited from the theft. His weapon would be irresistible, a beautiful evil. He commissioned a team of gods to build her. Hephaestus, the smith god, molded her from earth and water. Athena dressed her in silver robes and taught her needlework. Aphrodite poured grace upon her head. And, most critically, Hermes, the messenger god, gifted her a kuneos logos, a mind of trickery and a heart of deceit. She was designed to be a trap. The very qualities that would lead to disaster, her curiosity, her charm, her deceptive nature, were bestowed upon her by the gods themselves. She was then presented to Prometheus's slow-witted brother, Epimetheus, whose name means afterthought. Despite his brother's explicit warning never to accept a gift from Zeus, Epimetheus was captivated by Pandora's beauty and welcomed her. With her came the infamous jar. The narrative sets up an impossible paradox. Pandora is given a curious and cunning nature, then placed in a situation with a forbidden object and told not to open it. She was built to fail. Her story masterfully shifts the blame away from the true culprit. The evils in the jar, sickness, conflict, toil, and all other miseries, were put there by Zeus. They are manifestations of his divine anger. By using Pandora as the delivery mechanism, Zeus absolves himself of direct responsibility. The narrative frames the arrival of suffering as the fault of a curious woman, not the act of a tyrannical king. For millennia, Pandora has carried the weight of this divine scheme, her name synonymous with catastrophe. She is the perfect distraction, a beautiful face that masks the political fury of Olympus, a timeless lesson in how the powerful can write history to blame the powerless for their own actions. Myths do not remain confined to ancient texts. They seep into the cultural groundwater, emerging centuries later in paintings, poems, and plays, reinterpreted for new audiences. Pandora's story, with its potent mix of beauty, temptation, and tragedy, has proven to be an especially fertile ground for artistic exploration. For over 500 years, she has been a muse, a symbol, and a subject of endless fascination. During the Renaissance, as artists and thinkers rediscovered the classical world, Pandora emerged as a popular subject. Often, she was visually conflated with the biblical Eve, another first woman associated with a fateful transgression. In paintings from the school of Fontainebleau, she is depicted with the serene, idealized beauty of the era, her fateful container now firmly established as an ornate box. These works frame her story as a classical parallel to the fall of man, a tale of innocence lost through a moment of weakness. The Victorian era, with its complex attitudes towards women, knowledge, and desire, became obsessed with Pandora. The pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, in particular, was drawn to her. Dante Gabriel Rossetti's Pandora portrays her not as a villain, but as a somber, tragic figure, a beautiful woman burdened by the terrible power she holds. John William Waterhouse painted her multiple times, capturing a pensive, melancholic maiden, seemingly aware of the gravity of her choice. For the Victorians, she became a powerful symbol of the femme fatale, whose curiosity and allure could lead to ruin. She embodied their anxieties about female empowerment and the pursuit of forbidden knowledge. In literature, her myth was adapted to serve countless narratives. Voltaire used her story as a philosophical allegory, while Romantic poets celebrated her as part of the Promethean struggle against divine tyranny. In the 20th century, Frank Wedekind's controversial plays, collectively known as the Lulu Cycle and subtitled Pandora's Box, used her as a metaphor for raw, untamed female sensuality that disrupts and ultimately destroys the rigid, hypocritical society around her. Today, her presence is felt everywhere, from novels that retell her story from her own perspective to blockbuster films and video games where Pandora's box is a literal object of immense power or a doomsday device. Each new interpretation says less about ancient Greece and more about the time in which it was created. Pandora has become a timeless canvas onto which we project our evolving understanding of guilt, curiosity, and hope. After the cacophony of evils bursts forth from the jar, after sickness, strife, and sorrow have flown out to blanket the world, the story of Pandora ends on a quiet, deeply ambiguous note. Following Zeus's will, she manages to close the lid just in time, trapping one final spirit inside: Olympus, the personification of hope. This final detail is the most debated and philosophically rich part of the entire myth. It transforms the tale from a simple origin story of suffering into a profound meditation on the human condition. The question that has echoed through the ages is simple: is hope a good thing or a bad thing? The most common optimistic interpretation is that hope is humanity's sole consolation. In a world now filled with hardship, Zeus allowed one benevolent spirit to remain, a comfort to help mortals endure their suffering. Hope is the light that flickers in the gloom, the motivation to continue on despite the pain. It is the final, small mercy from the gods, a tool for survival. Without it, humanity would have surely succumbed to despair. However, a darker, more cynical interpretation has long been argued by philosophers, most notably Friedrich Nietzsche. He posed a troubling question: why was hope in a jar filled with evils? Perhaps, he suggested, hope is the most insidious evil of all. It is the cruelest trick Zeus played on mankind. This view posits that hope is what prolongs human agony. It is blind hope, or false expectation, which convinces people to passively endure their miserable circumstances in the belief that things might get better. It prevents them from taking decisive action or from accepting the release of oblivion. In this reading, hope is not a comfort. It is the chain that tethers us to a life of suffering. The original Greek word, elpis, adds another layer of complexity. It does not mean hope in the purely positive sense we use it today. Elpis meant expectation, which could be for good or for ill. So, what did Pandora trap inside? Was it the expectation of further evils, thereby saving humanity from constant dread? Or did she trap the only antidote to the poisons she had released? This ambiguity allows for one final, more empowering interpretation of Pandora's actions. Perhaps closing the lid was not a mistake, but her first and only act of defiance and wisdom. By trapping hope, she did not deny it to humanity. Instead, she preserved it. Unlike the other spirits that flew away to disperse across the world, hope remains contained, a resource that humanity can access when it is most needed. She became its guardian. The myth offers no easy answers. It leaves us suspended in this paradox, just as humanity is suspended between suffering and the expectation of relief. Pandora's legacy is not just the hardship she unleashed, but also the eternal question of how we should treat the one thing that remained: the profound and perilous nature of hope.